The Dreamer by Pam Muñoz Ryan and Peter Sis. Which is sharper, the hatchet that cuts down dreams, or the scythe that clears a path for another? Under a veil of steam, Naphtali traveled on the chuffing train deep into the rainforest. As he looked out the window, he thought carefully about Rodolfo's advice. On the outside, he had followed all of Father's instructions. He had worn a wool sweater. He had sat up front in the seat next to Father. He had not fidgeted or climbed on the bench. He had not spoken to any of the workers nor drawn attention to himself. On the inside, he jumped up and down with excitement. His stomach quivered, and he secretly kept pinching himself to make sure he was not dreaming. After several hours, the engine stopped. The sturdy men clambered from the train. Naphtali followed Father, stepping down into the world of conifers. His senses whirled, and he felt giddy. He could not turn his head fast enough to absorb it all. Tiny needles of light piercing the canopy, the untamed overgrowth of plants and trees, the musty smell of giant mushrooms, the crisp fragrance of pine, the sudden shrieks and flights of parrots. Father stood next to him, blowing his whistle and giving orders to the men, who set to work quarrying stone rubble. "See," said Father, "the men shovel the rocks onto the hods, those cradles set crosswise on the poles. Then, 2 men, one on each end, lift them and dump the rock onto the train cars. Another day, it will be hauled to a stretch of track and will become the ballast to anchor the washed-out rails." Fascinated, Naphtali nodded and watched the men lift the hods and march to the train, their bodies already glistening with perspiration. "Stay nearby. I will signal when it is time for lunch." Father hurried toward the workers. Naphtali was grateful to explore alone. Reverently, he crept into the forest, but not too far. Even just a short distance from the train, it was as if he were in a great domed cathedral, a world without sky. He stopped every few steps, examining the novelties, the bellies of gigantic fronds, the luminescent wings of insects, bird feathers and pods that had dropped from the canopy. He collected pockets full of twigs and slippery partridge eggs. He overturned dead limbs to find the hollows where spiders lived. All morning, Naphtali wandered, inhaling the scent of wet leaves, wild herbs, and cinnamon. With a stick, he cleared a swath of damp earth and wrote on it. Slowly, he murmured the words to the trees, delighting in the tempos they played on his tongue. Chucao, Rauli, Liana, Luma, Herba, Copihue, Mapuche, Puma. Naphtali looked around to see if anyone was near. If Father had heard or seen him, would he have thought him absent-minded? Was he doing something wrong? He smudged out the words and kicked the leaves back in place. He heard a rustling inside a rotting log and bent to peek inside. A gigantic horned beetle scurried from beneath the leaves. At first, Naphtali jerked back, but then he bent closer to watch it hiss. He had never seen a beetle so big or fierce-looking. "He is a monster, no?" Naphtali jumped at the voice. He looked up to see Father looming over him. Had he blown his whistle and Naphtali had not heard? But Father did not look angry. "It is a rhinoceros beetle," said Father. "He is so strong that he can carry a log 800 times heavier than his own weight. See his horns? He uses them to fight. He is a king." He patted Naphtali on the back. "It will be time for lunch soon. Come back to the train in a few minutes." Naphtali nodded and watched him walk away, swaggering beneath the dark cape with the confidence of someone who owned the forest. Naphtali turned back to the beetle. How could something so small overcome and carry a burden so large? What magic did it possess? As he marveled at the beetle, the shell contorted and bulged, growing bigger and bigger, its legs elongated until it was as tall as a pony. Naphtali looked on with fascination. Two giant beady eyes looked back. The rhinoceros beetle moved closer. When it was inches from Naphtali, it folded its front legs and lowered its hideous head, as if it were deferring to him. Then it made a tiny squeak. Oddly unafraid, Naphtali climbed onto its sturdy back and rode it through the forest, harnessing all of its strange strength. What lies beneath the bravado of a black and shiny armor? I wonder who that is. At lunch, Naphtali sat next to Father. He listened to the workers banter back and forth with good-natured teasing. Even Father joined in until he paused, pointed to a nearby tree, and whispered, "Shh!" Naphtali turned to see another beetle, this one a shimmering rainbow. He sucked in his breath. The living jewel! In wonder, they all sat still and quiet. Suddenly, a parrot swooped overhead, startling the insect. In an instant, the beetle became a flash of color, then disappeared. Father nudged him. "Your first day in the forest, and you see such a thing. You have the luck." One of the men tossed Naphtali a tomato. "So, how do you like this life on the ballast train?" Before Naphtali could answer, Father draped an arm around his shoulder. "He likes it fine," he said. "After all, he's a railroader's son." Naphtali looked at the ground, grinning from ear to ear. So this was the other father. "Will he be a conductor too?" asked another. "Most definitely not," said Father. "He has bigger plans. He will be a doctor or a dentist." Naphtali looked up at Father. A doctor or dentist? How did Father know what Naphtali would become when he did not know himself?